I hope you saw last summer's feature article in the Independent Record that summarized our project and some key issues facing Helena Valley. This presentation is another opportunity to learn and to have input into the planning process. As we have been sharing the story with stakeholder groups over the past 6 months, and we're sending a survey out to over 10,000 households in Helena Valley to give the results and get input on this update of the Lewis and Clark County growth policy. Part of our story is the growth that happened in the period between 2000 and 2010. This graphic shows that growth, and each of the little icons on the graphic represent a new house that was built based on address points provided to us. And over that decade, about 5,000 new units of housing were actually built outside of the city limits, and another 1,000 lots were platted and ready for development. This was a boom period for all major cities of Montana, followed by the worst bust since the Great Depression. The cumulative impact of development over those 10 years of growth was adding about 50 to 60,000 vehicle trips a day to the road network of the valley, and pulling out 1 million gallons of water daily pumped from the aquifers, and hundreds of thousands of gallons being returned through the households and their wastewater systems back into the aquifers that serve as drinking water source for about 20,000 people in the valley. Those 5,000 units built in the last decade were added to the pre-existing housing in development shown on this slide, and up through the last decade, the populations of Helena and East Helena were 28,000 for Helena, 2,000 for East Helena, but another 24,000 people now live in the valley outside of the two cities in these developing communities within the valley. According to the school department and other demographic studies, projections are that by the end of the decade we're currently in, as many as another 10,000 people could be added to the valley. So one of the important policy questions and direction that we're looking at is, will the county and the school district be able to provide needed and expected services as growth continues? We currently have a growth policy which has these policy areas, including goals and recommended policies. There are policy recommendations on agriculture and ranching in that first box, making sure development pays its own way and looking for commercial development as a way to subsidize city services and county services. The transportation components of the growth policy that was adopted in 2004 addresses certain issues, including bicycle and pedestrian circulation. Public access to open space and recreation opportunities is another key area, along with fire protection. And then there are several environmental concerns and goals contained in the current growth policy. And then finally, trying to get the City of Helena, City of East Helena, Lewis and Clark County and Jefferson County all to be working together to plan for growth. Now, of these categories, there are three that kind of jump out as what the key issues that the county is facing right now. Those are in the categories of transportation, fire protection, and environmental issues. And within those categories, there are 4 key issues that we are really focusing on. The first of those is the availability of water for both new and existing housing within the valley as development continues. The second key issue is how the wastewater from that new development is going to be treated, and it's either going to go in compact development on public sewers, or it's going to be served by individual septic systems or community septic systems spread across the valley. And we can't just ignore the impacts of added traffic on our roads. It's not just the congestion that occurs that's a problem. That traffic also wears down the roads, with ever adding to the county costs of maintaining those roads, and the rural improvement districts that also do that. And the final key issue that we see a need to focus on is the difficulty of providing fire protection for all of this housing. These are the key issues that come up at every planning board meeting where we review a subdivision, and at every county commissioner meeting where they review those projects as well. There are other important issues, but those are currently covered within the 2004 version of our growth policy. Now, as I mentioned, at pretty much every county commission meeting and planning board meeting, we hear testimony from people who live in the valley who are concerned with the impacts of development. And this is just one example of many that I could show you and have you listen to.
Another one I want to bring up is the water. You know, I don't know who did the study on 100 foot, but most of the wells in that area are over 400. I'm at, I believe, 435. I know my neighbors at almost 460, which is east adjacent to this property, because I used to own it and sold it to them. You know, and if they build 4 new construction homes in there, you know, and they end up planting trees, which, you know, new construction, they're going to want to do this, they're going to want to put in grass yards, you know, and have all this stuff, and you got 4 places pumping that much water out during the summer, what happens to my well? You know, who's going to be responsible when mine goes dry? You know, I've got a decent well now.
So, we hear, as I said, neighbors come in and express concerns for water availability. And is that just an issue of someone being not wanting to see development across the street or in their backyard? Well, we have documented studies that indicate that they have valid concerns in terms of the availability of water for development and the potential impacts that development might have on their wells. Back in 2005, there were 30 homeowners who petitioned the Department of Natural Resources Conservation, and that state agency established a controlled groundwater area in the North Hills where no new wells could be drilled without approval from DNRC, while they tested groundwater and tried to find out what was going on with those 30 wells that had gone dry. They found, after 7 years of study, they concluded that the wells that had been affected were affected by a combination of drought conditions as well as some of the community wells of high-density subdivisions that have been developed in the area were causing a lowering of the groundwater and affecting wells, and they predicted it, if development continued in that area at those densities with those rates of water withdrawal, that additional wells would be affected. Another part of the valley, over on the east side, the 3 subdivisions in that east side of the valley had lot problems where people actually walked away from lots after they had purchased them and were not able to get water, or the well costs were more than the cost of the lot, or the quality of the water was just not adequate to be able to have a home. So what we're seeing is that, especially in that border of the valley, outside of the low parts of the valley before you get up to the hills, are areas where the water is really questionable in terms of availability, and we have documented issues of problems that have been created where people either had their lots affected by other development going in, or people purchased lots and then couldn't get water to serve those lots. So we've got some key policy questions on water availability. The first is, how much concern is there for water shortages? Are there just a few isolated instances that we've documented, or are there broader implications in this first policy area of water availability? Secondly, does the county have a responsibility to protect existing well users from new development drawdowns? Or is that really a matter best left to the state of Montana and the Department of Natural Resources Conservation? Thirdly, does the county have a responsibility to ensure that lot purchasers will have adequate water when they purchase a lot? Or is the county's responsibility simply to warn lot owners and educate them that there's a possibility that in the short term and in the long run, their water supply may not be relied upon? If there are if there is support for the county taking responsibility in this area, then we can begin to explore what the options for intervention would be and the pros and cons of those options. The next important area that we're exploring is wastewater disposal. And over the last decade, 5,000 new homes went in. The vast majority of those went in on individual septic systems or community wastewater systems that serve multiple households. Very little of the development that went in the valley went into the public sewer system of Helena or East Helena. And part of the reason for that is that in 1998, the city of Helena, when it upgraded the sewer treatment plant, did a study known as the Helena Area Wastewater Treatment Study, and they evaluated the options for upgrading the treatment plant, which they estimated at that time to cost about $10 million. And then they did several scenarios for sewering the rest of the valley and came up with cost estimates of between $30 and $40 million to run public sewer throughout the valley. And they also projected that the user fees for each individual homeowner, what they would be if the valley were served by public sewer. Well, needless to say, at that time, before the big boom period that followed in terms of development, the conclusions of that study were to just sewer the cities and provide adequate capacity for expansion right around them, but to keep the rest of the valley low density on individual septic systems and to rehabilitate some of those existing lagoons. Well, the city went ahead and invested the money in the treatment plant, but unfortunately, the rest of the valley, there were no land use controls to require low density on individual septic systems, and we saw a mixture of that type of development, as well as large community wastewater systems serving hundreds of homes. And we have an example of what happens when that goes wrong in the 10 Mile Creek, Pleasant Valley development, where you had 300 homes in those red circled graphics on the slide, and the lagoon system over to the right that served them. Well, the DEQ did testing and found that that wastewater system was only treating about 25% of the effluent flows coming out of the housing, and they filed a lawsuit to force the developer to rehabilitate that system and get it working according to the state standards. After several years of litigation, finally, the ownership of the lagoon system was taken away from the developer who built it and operated it, and a new sewer district was formed of the homeowners, and they voted to spend $4 million initially. The actual cost of the project raised to $5.8 million to rehabilitate that. And during that entire time period, homes within the subdivisions couldn't be sold or even refinanced because of the legal problems that were happening. So this isn't just an issue of water quality, as important as that is. It also affects individual homeowners and families within our valley. So within the category of wastewater, here are some policy questions. First, again, how much concern is there for groundwater drinking supply protection? Secondly, should the county require professional maintenance of those community septic systems if they're done, or can homeowners associations really have and fulfill that responsibility? And then thirdly, as I said, in 1998, the decision was made not to pursue broad availability of public sewers within the valley. Before the next wave of development comes, it's an opportunity for the county and the city to revisit that policy question. The next and third area are the roads within the valley where subdivisions are being built and served and added to those road networks. And as I said, about 50,000 vehicle trips a day are added with each 5,000 new units of housing that are added. And it's not just an issue of the traffic congestion and delays that increase, it's also adding high volumes on roads that were really not designed to accommodate it, and that increases the need for maintenance